Dr. Robert Malone, thank you for joining me on the Iconoclast One-to-One.
My pleasure.
Dr. Malone, you're a physician, a molecular biochemist, and probably most famous as being the inventor of the technology that went into the mRNA vaccines. I suppose the first question is, what was it that happened that made you think things weren't quite as they seemed over the last couple of years?
Actually, the very first thing was I had received this phone call from a colleague who's in the intelligence community, let's put it gently, who was based in Wuhan, that I published with in the past. He was located in Wuhan, and as part of an exchange between Harvard University and a Chinese university. He called me from Wuhan on January 4th and said, "We've got a problem here, Robert, and you need to get your team spun up." With that, my wife and partner, Dr. Jill Glasspool Malone, and I both got to work. We've been through many outbreaks. It's been really the whole trajectory of my career. So this was yet another one. So I was working with an existing team that was funded by the Department of Defense that was working on identifying drugs that would be useful as countermeasures for organophosphates, which is to say certain pesticides and, more importantly, many of the biowarfare agents that go back to World War I. And we were using the latest technologies to do this. So I started working on drug repurposing with my team on a volunteer basis using those technologies. And Jill got going writing a book that was really written for friends and neighbors. You know, that was the tone of voice, was trying to help our friends and neighbors and just, you know, average people going about their life to prepare for this novel coronavirus, prepare and protect for this novel coronavirus. And I helped her with that. I wrote a couple chapters and edited it. But she was the primary author. We got it out in the first week in February, self-published on Amazon. And really the first awareness that things were not right, were not as they had been in prior outbreaks, was when that book got censored by Amazon in March, taken down, and we could get no explanation for why it was censored.
This was in March 2020?
Correct.
Wow.
So that was really the first notification and really a foreshadowing of this growing wave of propaganda and censorship and total information control that we've seen ever since. And of course, it was really upsetting to Jill. She'd put her heart and soul into producing this document, which was well referenced by a PhD and an MD MS that were specialists in the area. She's a specialist in public policy. And to have this taken down arbitrarily by Amazon with no explanation at all, absolutely no appeal, was shocking and very upsetting for her because she'd really put her heart into this.
And what sort of things was being suggested in the book?
That you should grow your own garden, that we talked about in chapter by chapter. There was a chapter that talked about the fundamentals of coronaviruses and the history of coronavirus vaccines, et cetera. We did, I think probably the thing that provoked the censors was that we advocated for mask use. And you'll recall at the time that was not the official position of the World Health Organization or Anthony Fauci, that masks should be used. You remember they flip-flopped on that.
Were you advocating mask use across the whole population or just in clinical settings? What?
For individuals, for self-protection. The book was all focused on self-protection. And so we talked about many of the things that foreshadowed what the current policies are. The use of alcohol wipes on airplanes when you're traveling, how to we talked about social distancing, we talked about bathroom, because this is likely to have some fecal transmission component. And so we talked about kind of common sanitary practices that you can take in your home. The common sense stuff that everybody knows. And it was taken down. And we had hoped that because Amazon self-publishing allows you to update editions, we had been updating as new information came along. And I think it was the third or fourth update that we submitted, and Amazon held for a long time, which was odd. And then we were given notice that it would be taken down. And they used the same language that we've heard again and again. It was inconsistent with their community policies, but they wouldn't say how it was in violation of their community policies. And there was absolutely nothing in their policies about anything having to do with this. There was no pornography in it or anything like that. It was totally inexplicable. So Jill in particular dug into trying to understand what had happened, and was able to document the series of meetings that the World Health Organization held first with tech, including Amazon, Facebook, Google, etc., in February of 2020, and then the subsequent meetings that were held at the White House with tech. And so it was concurrent with this very early, well-documented push by the World Health Organization initially to control all information relating to the outbreak. So you ask what was the initial inciting event which caused me to be aware that this was going to be very different from all of the outbreaks that we've dealt with in the past. That was it. I was at a academic meeting at MIT last Monday, where one of the theses proposed was this was the first social media public health outbreak. That's absolutely not true. We were very active on social media. I was in particular with both Zika and with the Ebola outbreak, particularly on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, all that is now lost, that record.
Well, they
deplatformed me off of LinkedIn, which means all of that information has been lost as a historic record. I had photographs from inside the World Health Organization at key meetings with the Director General and all kinds of information documenting what had happened there, all flushed, which is unfortunate in terms of the historic record. But never seen anything like this. But the kind of the initial trigger that things aren't quite the way they were before, which turned out to be very prescient, as we've seen the massive information control and propaganda campaign develop over time, was this initial censorship of Jill's book.
So tell me a little bit about the Malone Institute. What is the purpose of it? What are you hoping it will achieve?
So the genesis of the Malone Institute really started with one of our early interventions, which happened in the island of Maui, Hawaii. There were two physicians in particular. There was a early initiative developed by a group in Hawaii that related to doing the right thing and the importance of informed consent. And there was a couple of physicians there in particular that had led that and played a key role. And they had spoken out about the public health practices occurring in Hawaii. One of them was the public health officer for the island of Maui. who had deep experience. He's actually ex-Department of Defense, with deep experience in informed consent and that whole bioethical space, which is super important to the military, or was historically. And then a pediatric cardiologist who was, both of them were wary of the vaccines and the data supporting the vaccines. The public health leader was speaking out that there was not sufficient data to support vaccination of pregnant women. Both of them, but in particular the pediatric cardiologist, was administering early treatment at a time when this was being very actively blocked. And both of them had been attacked by political actors in Maui, in the state of Hawaii, in public, for essentially claiming medical malpractice because they were saying these things and engaging in early treatment. And there was an active effort to try to take their medical licenses away. Just recently, within, I think, the last month, that case was finally closed. It failed. They were able to preserve their medical license, but after enormous personal and family psychological trauma, professional damage. But a group of us had flown out to Maui to give a teaching and conduct some rallies in support of our colleagues that were at the forefront of this wave of censorship and targeting of physicians. I call it hunting physicians, by politicians with ties to Pfizer, actually, that has swept over the United States and the world, really. While I was there, I was approached by a group, one of which was Mr. Ed Dowd, who's become more famous since then. And I've had an opportunity to help amplify his message, and I've been grateful that I was able to pay back. But this group approached me, and actually on my birthday, on October 20th of that year, brought me into a room with Jill, and they had told me that they had written this document called the Malone Doctrine, and that they had watched and read everything that I had said, which I felt sorry for them, and that this was not something that I had said, but rather it was their words were, it was in the white space between the lines of everything that I had said. And this Malone Doctrine really is, it's a very simple document focused on rebuilding integrity and the importance of integrity. And it was presented as being akin to a building code that, because one of them is a inspector, a building inspector, and they used the metaphor of the common international building codes, which when applied properly ensure the integrity of a building, a structure, and use that as a metaphor saying what we've lost is the integrity of our systems. And we have to find a way to rebuild that integrity. And this code of ethics, essentially what this Malone Doctrine is designed, if an organization will endorse this and commit to these principles, then they will be able to be verified as having integrity as an organization. And that this was the point that from whence we needed to rebuild what had gone wrong here. And so the Malone Institute is really a nonprofit structure that we've launched that is intended to enable and amplify this code of ethics is really what it is. But I hadn't been aware at the time about who Ed Dowd was. I just met him, and I've come to understand that Ed played a key role in building that. And it's really intended as a kind of a universal document for any vertical, for any industrial vertical that has been, or governmental one that's been corrupted.
Political.
Yeah. And it was very consciously engineered that way to have language that could be applied to any vertical industry or governmental organization that has been compromised. So Malone Institute is kind of a structure to house that, and then to move beyond that and try in whatever small way we can to address what the sources of these failures of integrity and these political compromises to our political institutions that have occurred. So that's the genesis of it. That's the intent. And we have to start from somewhere. And so that's just as Tess has done with this conference here, when she originally had the moment of inspiration out of frustration with the ivermectin meta-analysis, that something is deeply wrong here and needs to be corrected. And I think that was the spark that created this conference and the organization she's building. And likewise, you know, from small beginnings, let's hope the Malone Institute can grow.
And one of the projects is looking at the World Economic Forum, is that correct?
Absolutely. So as I've been bedeviled ever since by the two questions that Brett Weinstein posed in the Dark Horse podcast with Steve Kirsch and myself, which were essentially, paraphrased, the big how and the big why. Why is this all being weaponized against us in this way, and how is it being done globally, has led me through a journey that I really haven't wanted to take. It's outside of my core competence. You know, it's led me through the awareness that what we're observing has nothing to do with public health. It has to do with broader agendas. And what are those agendas, and who are those people, and how has this been globally coordinated? And I've had many people come to the farm or talk to me over time through this, and they kept talking about Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, and I was really resistant to that. It just sounded a little too conspiratorial. Yeah, it was just too spooky and weird and fringe. And yet, as I read more and learned more and observed more, it was the only explanation that fit the data. And so that's what led me to coming to a personal conviction that this is the organization and these are the people that are behind these coordinated distortions of public health globally. And basically, I'm on a quest to solve the problem, whichever way it goes. And it turned out the problem really wasn't about, you know, yes, it is about the RNA technology and the nuance of pseudouridine and these very detailed pharmaceutical issues, and the compromise of the regulatory process and the compromise of the public health process. But all of that is down in the weeds because it's all in the service of a much bigger agenda. And so that's what led us to the awareness that, as outlined in Klaus Schwab's book, COVID-19, The Great Reset, that this is really all in service of a much larger agenda. And then the question comes, and I hear it all the time now, what can we do about it? These are people that have such enormous political and economic power that they can dictate the policies of nation states. They can control the politics in Great Britain or the United States or Australia or New Zealand or France or Portugal or fill in the blank.
It's even in Ireland, we have, as far as we know, what we found is at least 25 key figures, including our Deputy Prime Minister, the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar. So he was actually the person who was part of the coalition. He was in control when the pandemic hit. And then the current Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, has just been invited to Davos to speak for the first time. So, you know, we look at our Minister for Foreign Affairs, you know, and all of these people are also just popping over to Ukraine for the weekend as well which is quite bizarre. They all seem to be, again, WEF.
Yeah, the Irish government, I'm sure, has major geopolitical interests in Ukraine. I'm being facetious. So, yeah. So then the question comes, what can we do about it? And you've just kind of named what I think is the starting point. And there is I think ethically, you have to, it's a fine line about doxing people. Doxing is something that generally is frowned upon, particularly in the internet community. It's slang, as you know, that comes from the internet community, which is to say identifying people and their personal information. But these are folks that there's a group that has been trained over 30 years or more of essentially acolytes or functionaries trained by the World Economic Forum. And let's just be clear, the World Economic Forum is basically a trade organization. That's what it is. It's a trade organization that unifies approximately the 100 largest companies in the world and their majority or controlling shareholders, which is to say basically Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street investment groups that control trillions of dollars and have such economic power that they can dictate the policies of nation states. They have the power to bankrupt or enable economic growth. In Ireland, that's been a problem. I mean, you went through the Irish miracle, and then you've had the subsequent not so miracle, and the pain and suffering associated with it. I mean, Ireland is a great case study in how the flow of international finance can profoundly impact on human beings. And so what we believed one of the first things we could do is to figure out who these trainees are and where they are, and where they come from, and when they were trained, who the other members of their training club. Remember, this Young Leaders Program is a 5-year training program. And the epiphany was that so many of these leaders that have been responsible for these very authoritarian, totalitarian measures, such as the lockdowns, and advocating the digital IDs and all of that, vaccine passports, et cetera, all had ties to the Young Leaders Program, had been trained by the World Economic Forum, this coalition of 100 companies, to do their bidding, and intentionally placed, as we have seen in the videotaped statements of their leader, Klaus Schwab, ostensible leader. I think he's the public face, but not necessarily the force behind it. Because if you read his book, frankly, I do not detect an intellectual giant behind those words. I see a lot of really squishy thinking, bad science, and just I do not see in almost any of these people signs of high-powered intellects that are, the good news is that if they were, they could have trained really wicked, sharp people to do their bidding, but that doesn't seem to be what they have done.
Not the case in Ireland.
nor in France, nor in New Zealand, nor in, Justin Trudeau always strikes me as an intellectual giant. I'm being facetious. So there's that. I mean, it could be worse. So we took the effort that a lot of these people are hidden. And the World Economic Forum presents some of the names in the more recent classes, but they don't provide a nice archive of all of their trainees. And so we had to invest hundreds of hours between my group and our research assistant and a group that's in Europe that also had a background in prior investigations into this group, led by a PhD who got his thesis on investigating some of these things, and recently published on the Malone Institute a spreadsheet that anybody can download that represents hundreds and hundreds of hours of labor and months of work to identify and out all these people, who they are, where they're from, when they were trained, what they do, what their industrial sectors are, and what you can, that's just a starting point. It's all searchable, and it's just a standard Excel spreadsheet, so you can apply whatever tools. And you can identify what their agenda is by their footprints. You can identify where the WEF is trying to go with this, and what industries they're targeting, and how they're targeting, and geographically which ones they think are important, by working through all that information and looking at the industrial sectors that they have trained, brought people from, and trained them and placed them back into. One of the things that I found striking is almost all of these people you see pop up almost out of nowhere. Yeah. They've often been fast-tracked in so many different ways, and then their careers have exploded all of a sudden out of nothing, because they have this backing. And so it's just a starting point. Yeah. The next spreadsheet we have that's should be mature within the next month is the Young Scientist Program. And then there's the Global Shapers. And they have a program for young people. Greta Thunberg is one of their trainees, just to say as one example. So they're now this trade organization of 100 companies are training and placing people in positions of influence and power throughout the world. They're doing it intentionally. They're transparent about that is what they're doing. And they are starting to use the language that they are the world government. They have executed treaties with the United Nations and the World Health Organization, and they clearly don't believe in the concept of decentralized nation-state network. They believe in a one world government, and they believe they should be that government.
Well, I think that's a fantastic place for people to start if they're wondering themselves, who's behind this, and the big how and the big why. And I think particularly for those in Ireland who are still wondering, what's been going on, it's great to hear this information from you in particular. And just want to say thank you so much for your time today. And as always, keep up the amazing work, and the courage to have spoken out has just been so huge. Given your stature in the scientific and medical community, it's just really amazing to see that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks for your support. And we'll get through this. But we have to remember three things, right? We have to remember integrity, dignity, and building community. That's how we get through this.